Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining again tonight. It's a great honor to have Mrs. Monique Carels with us. She attended the conference in Gauteng last month, and she presented there. And this is a duplication of that, since we had a problem with internet at the conference. Monique, thank you so much for your time once again. It's always an honor to have Monique with us. She was my lecturer when I did my master's at UCT. And for those of you who are interested in following that course, it's highly recommended. Monique will be your lecturer in at least two of those subjects, mediation as well as negotiation. Monique, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the introduction, Lodi. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Lodi said, I am Monique Carels, and I will be presenting to you on peer mediation today. Lodi also mentioned that I'm a lecturer at UCT, and so I am responsible for running the course, the LLM program, as well as the postgraduate diploma in dispute resolution. And in that program, I teach negotiation as well as mediation. So this topic, I'm very passionate about mediation, and specifically the topic that I'll be speaking about today, which is peer mediation. And so this presentation actually stems from a thesis that one of my students wrote and that I supervised. And so we will be presenting this paper in a journal article. So this is actually comes from a full thesis, not a full thesis, rather a mini thesis. So thank you, Lodi, once again. Thank you to you and Annika and the social justice team for allowing me this opportunity. Like I said, it's always lovely sharing what you are passionate about and just bringing awareness to mediation. And then today I'm bringing awareness on peer mediation. So I'm going to turn my camera off and then start the screen share. And I'm sure these slides can be made available. Lodi has a copy of these slides. So feel free to reach out to Lodi to get a copy of the slides if you are interested in the slides. Right, so stop video, share screen. Share. Okay, can you all see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So once again, this topic is on learners resolving conflict through peer mediation. The full title is actually Learners Resolving Conflict, Integrating Mandatory Peer Mediation in South African Public High Schools in order to address issues of discipline. So as a point of departure, I would like to share 4 headlines concerning issues that have transpired in our schools across South Africa. So the first image, the headline says more than 58% of South African students have encountered bullying. And then at the bottom it says, taking action against bullying in schools requires deep and meaningful conversations between parents, guardians, teachers, and students or learners. So my question is, are these meaningful and deep conversations actually happening in our schools to address issues of bullying? Because it is clear that bullying is prevalent in our schools. Image number 2, the headline says that there's a rising scourge of violence in South African schools, and this has become a concern for authorities. So we know that schools ought to be a place where learners can feel safe and secure, but it seems as though schools have become a place of violence and not a place of safety. Oh, yeah, so and also it's become crime scenes. Schools have become crime scenes. And the third image, the increase of sexual offences in South African schools have become a concern. And so yeah, once again, our schools are not a safe place and a safe haven for learners anymore. It's become a place of violent crimes taking place, such as sexual offences. And then the final headline that I'd like to share with you is the disciplinary hearing recommends expulsion of Nick Diedrich's learner. And so here we can see that in this specific instance, a learner, a grade 10 boy learner that is, was expelled, or the disciplinary hearing recommended that this learner be expelled from school. And in a moment, we'll unpack what the word expulsion means and what it means for a student or a learner to be expelled from school. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So as a way of introduction, it is clear that discipline in South African schools has become disorderly and disruptive. It appears that violence, bullying, harassment, assault, and victimization have become a reality at our schools across the nation and have become commonplace in South African schools. So disciplinary challenges exist in schools, and the current school disciplinary procedure is failing to address these problems. So we know that a solution is needed to address the plagues that's facing high schools in South Africa. And I'm just focusing on high schools in this paper and in this presentation today, but we do know that these issues also are prevalent in our primary schools. So in order for effective teaching and learning to take place in our schools, discipline is necessary. And the goal of any disciplinary system should be to encourage self-discipline and responsible behavior in our learners. So self-discipline, of course, is the ability to be accountable for one's own behavior. As a result, learners would behave responsibly. So that means that they would behave well without being told that they should behave well and without fear of punishment. However, the problem identified by this presentation and in our article is that the current measures have not been successful in teaching learners self-discipline and responsible behavior, because at the end of the day, that is the goal of a disciplinary system. Moreover, the current measures have not positively changed issues of ill discipline. So the rationale for this paper is to then evaluate whether integrating mandatory peer mediation will resolve conflict and address issues of discipline in our schools. So just to give you a background as to what the current school disciplinary procedure is, so now we're just going to give you a brief summary of what happens in a school disciplinary procedure before we move on to what peer mediation is and how peer mediation can assist in a school disciplinary procedure. So in the school disciplinary procedure, the school governing body is responsible for drafting a school code of conduct. So the school governing body is in fact a statutory body in terms of the South African Schools Act, and the school governing body comprises of the school principal, educators of that school. It consists of parents, non-teaching staff, as well as learners. So in terms of the Schools Act give a list of functions of the school governing body, and one of those functions is to draft a school code of conduct. And so they are responsible for drafting a code of conduct that is followed by all learners. Moreover, the South African Schools Act has certain guidelines that can be followed in drafting a code of conduct for the school. So the main aim of a school code of conduct is to establish discipline. So here we can see that discipline is essential in the schooling environment. So the main aim is to establish a disciplined and purposeful school environment dedicated to the improvement and maintenance of the quality of the learning process. So in a nutshell, what we can say, the aim of a code of conduct is to establish discipline. So discipline, you can see, is very, very important in the schooling environment. So there are certain procedural rules that are coupled with these guidelines for governing school, for governing school discipline. And specifically in the Western Cape, there are certain regulations governing discipline that have been adopted that sets out the procedure to be followed in serious misconduct cases. So essentially, if a serious misconduct has been committed by a learner, it sets out what should happen to that learner. So we're going to delve into that for a little while. So in terms of the regulations, Regulation 3 gives you a list of what constitutes serious misconduct. So serious misconduct includes bullying, assault, theft, gross insubordination, cheating in an assessment at school, and using hate speech. So of course, those are just some examples. There are further examples of what constitutes a serious misconduct. But if a learner has been found has been found contravening the school code of conduct and has committed a serious misconduct, that learner has to attend a disciplinary hearing. So a learner has contravened the school's code of conduct, has committed a serious misconduct, that learner has to attend a disciplinary hearing, and this disciplinary hearing must be held no later than 5 days after the learner has received notice of such a hearing. During this time, the learner can be suspended for a maximum of 7 school days as a precautionary measure. So the learner is suspended during this time. And of course, this a suspension, the definition of a suspension is that the learner is prohibited from physically attending the school, so in which they are enrolled at. So for 7 days, they are unable to attend the school. So before the suspension is imposed, however, the learner must be allowed an opportunity to make representation concerning the suspension. Okay, so the learner is afforded an opportunity to state his or her case and to argue why he or she should not be suspended, but usually it's just a precautionary measure. So usually suspension is carried out anyway, but the regulations make reference to an opportunity for the learner to represent to make representations on why he or she should not be suspended, but usually suspension does take place. So it must be borne in mind that a disciplinary hearing is quasi-judicial in nature. So quasi-judicial meaning that it is very similar to a court of law, but it is not a court of law. So it is similar to court proceedings, not a it is not a criminal procedure. At the hearing, the chairperson of the committee, the disciplinary committee, will read out the charges to the learner. Thereafter, the learner will either plead guilty or not guilty to the charge. Should the learner plead guilty, the learner has the right to make representation regarding possible sanctions. And the sanctions, of course, are either suspension or expulsion. And in a moment, I will define what expulsion means. So that is when the learner pleads guilty. When the learner pleads not guilty, the school and the learner are allowed to present arguments, adduce evidence, cross-examine, and re-examine. So here you can hear that these terms, the terms argument, adducing evidence, cross-examining, and re-examining, is very similar to a court of law. However, again, it is not a court of law, although it resembles a court of law. George, you raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Monique. Just to get a better understanding of this disciplinary hearing, would it involve lawyers to participate, or won't there be any legal fraternity representing party? Because that would be quite interesting. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So, yeah, thanks for your question, George. So usually no, usually there is no legal representation. The learners, they either represent themselves or their parents will represent or speak on their behalf. So although it is similar to a court of law, no legal representation is needed in a disciplinary hearing at school.
Thank you, Monique. Just to add on that, what role would the parents be playing? Would they also be involved in the disciplinary hearing, posing questions or anything, or would they only be observer in this? Thank you.
Yeah, so usually, George, they're there to support their child, because remember, their child is the transgressed learner. Their child was the learner who has transgressed the school's code of conduct. So it's more of a support role, but parents can speak on behalf of their child, who's the learner, if their child feels that the parents should be speaking on their behalf, because the matter obviously affects the parents as well. And because these learners are usually they're minors, yeah, it is recommended that parents be, but playing a support role.
Thank you, Monique.
You're most welcome. So yeah, so we said that the learner will plead guilty or not guilty, and where the disciplinary hearing or committee recommends expulsion, the recommendation at all the minutes and written evidence from the hearing are to be forwarded to the HOD for approval, so the head of department within the province. So an expulsion is defined as the permanent prohibition of attendance of a learner from the school that they were enrolled in. So expulsion basically is saying that the learner is no longer able to attend that specific school ever. So there are serious consequences involved if a learner is found guilty of a serious misconduct, and the most gruesome consequence would then be expulsion, because you will often find that learners who have been expelled for serious misconduct, other schools do not want to accept them because they are deemed to be problem children. Even with suspension also has serious consequences attached to it, because a learner can be suspended for up to 21 days, which has serious impacts on that learner's academic progress. So we'll speak more about that in a moment. But here we can see the sanctions of suspension and expulsion have serious consequences to a learner. Of course, the learner learners are able to appeal the outcome and the process, but we won't delve into that. But do know that the transgressor learner may appeal the decision that was handed down in the disciplinary hearing. So interestingly, neither the Schools Act nor the regulations make provision for informal disciplinary process or alternative dispute resolution discipline measures. So the Schools Act regulations simply states that a disciplinary hearing should take place. So then no provision is made for alternative discipline measures. However, according to Guideline 9 includes a dispute resolution clause, but this clause is very limited. So let's quickly read it, and then we can discuss what the guideline says. So in terms of this guideline number 9, educators as disciplinarians must resolve disciplinary problems which are not serious enough to be referred to the principal. So here we can see that educators already play a mediator role, but it only says with regard to minor issues, matters that are not serious enough to be taken to a disciplinary hearing. So here we can see that mediation somewhat is incorporated into this dispute resolution clause. It further says that a liaison mechanism or objective and impartial adjudicator between learners and educators should be set up to resolve disputes. So here makes reference to the word adjudicator. So we know that an adjudicator is actually someone who makes a decision, whereas in mediation, the mediator does not make the decision. It is the disputing parties who come to a decision. So the first part of this guideline makes reference to mediation. And then the second sentence makes reference to adjudication. And then finally, the third sentence states, in cases where learners are involved in gangs, the principal of the school should not confront the gangs, but the governing body should set up a negotiation mechanism. So the third dispute resolution mechanism that we do see here is negotiation. But this clause, as it stands, does not really speak to mediation or peer mediation that can take place in schools. So one can argue that mediation should be included into the disciplinary process, which is a more suitable process for school-related disputes. And this should then be included to expand the purview and to make room for other disciplinary measures in minor as well as serious misconduct cases. And so the question is, should mediation or peer mediation not be included into the school disciplinary process? So that is a question that I'm leaving for you to think about. Any questions or comments at this stage? You are welcome to raise your hand and pose your question. If not, I will move on, and I don't mind taking questions at the end of this presentation as well. So what are the challenges to the current, or what are the challenges with the current school disciplinary procedure? So the current school disciplinary procedure at public high schools has several challenges. The most notable challenge is that the procedure is not achieving the purpose that the legislatures had envisioned. And just to remind you what the purpose or the main goal of a disciplinary procedure is, the main goal of a disciplinary procedure should be to encourage self-discipline and responsible behavior. But do you think that a disciplinary hearing encourages and motivates learners to take responsibility for their behaviors? And does it encourage self-discipline? So once again, food for thought. You can think about that. But this article presentation alludes to it not satisfying those goals. So the first, to move on to the challenges. So retributive versus restorative justice. So retributive justice versus restorative justice as it relates to school disciplines. So on the one hand, retributive justice takes the approach that where a rule has been broken, an appropriate punishment must be given. Why? Because an offense was committed. So this is what retributive justice is. Retributive looks at punishment. So what should be determined is what rule has been broken, who broke the rule, and what the appropriate punishment is for breaking that rule. So in criminal law, the retribution is carried out by the state and not the victim. Why? Because it is the state who creates the rule, who enforces the rule, and who investigates all contraventions to the rule and punishes those that are found guilty of breaking the rule. Likewise, in a disciplinary hearing, it is the school governing body that establishes the rule and who enforces the rule. So here we can see that school disciplinary hearings are retributive in nature because it seeks to punish the offender or learner who has contravened the school's code of conduct. On the other hand, restorative justice is aimed at repairing the harm that was done. So this is where there was a violation against a person, and that violation now creates an obligation to repair the damage. So it's all about reparation and restitution and correcting the wrong that was done. So yeah, so let's move on. So a solely retributive justice system, retributive justice system is not in line with the objective of school discipline and the code of conduct at schools. And guideline 1.4 states that the main focus of the code of conduct must be positive discipline. It must not be punitive and punishment oriented, but facilitate constructive learning. So my question is, where is this taking place in our school, in our current school disciplinary procedure? Where is positive discipline? Where is the constructive learning that is taking place? So these guidelines are calling for positive discipline, and positive discipline can be defined as a method of discipline that builds a learner's self-esteem and encourages them to actively participate. So this definition is supported as learners should learn from their mistakes and take responsibility for their actions, and they should also learn the notion of self-discipline. But again, is this happening in our current school disciplinary procedure? And then another question that you can think about, and I'm not going to delve into that because of time. And the question is, are suspensions and expulsions in line with the best interest of the child standard? So the best interest of a child standard must, of course, also be considered in all matters concerning the child, and this includes matters provided for by the Schools Act. So one can therefore argue that this standard should also be applicable in terms of school discipline as it concerns children. So yeah, you can think about that, whether or not suspensions and expulsions are in the best interest of learners. And so our argument in this paper is that alternative measures should be employed to address issues of discipline. And that is where peer mediation comes in. So the next part of this presentation is looking at the nature of mediation, what peer mediation is, and then it also compares and contrasts peer mediation to a disciplinary hearing. So I'd just like to know if there are any questions or comments at this stage before we move on.
Monique, if I can come in here quickly. When we look at mediation, and depends on the what the transgression was, because obviously it's going to be very difficult to mediate, let's say, a rape case or sexual harassment or somebody stabbing somebody at school. I understand the dilemma that person made a mistake, but can he recover from the mistake? That's the other problem. And then again, the person to who the transgression took place, what about that person again? Because that person must face that person at school again. So it's a very sticky dilemma that you need to deal with, and you need to decide what you're going to mediate and what not. And it would also possibly be agreement from the party that was affected by this, if they prepare to mediate as well. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Exactly. And that is what I delve into in this part of the presentation. What matters are suitable for mediation in a school-related setting. So we look at, so we do touch on, is rape appropriate, is sexual harassment appropriate? But just as a short answer, we are of the view that these types of cases are not appropriate for peer mediation. And perhaps another form of mediation, victim-offender mediation, restorative justice mediation, but then also coupled with another form or another process that, where the offender can be punished. But first integrating mediation as a form of repairing the harm that was done, talking about what occurred, because often we find that in victim-offender mediation, all the victim wants is closure. All the victim wants is for his or her voice to be heard. So this is what I discussed in the presentation, what cases are suitable for peer mediation in a school setting. Yes.
Thank you.
And also whether or not the other learner wants to mediate, because as we know, mediation is generally voluntary, but in this paper, we argue for mandatory mediation, and mandatory peer mediation. Lizette Hendricks, I see your hand is up.
Hi, Monique. Monique,
Hi,
I
Lizzie.
just want to know, so who informs educators and school systems of all these processes and things that we're speaking about? Because I think schools are mostly focused, teachers, educators are focused on the curriculum and trying to get the curriculum out. So there is no interest in, do we go for mediation? Do we do this? They are strictly, when it comes to it's a matter of disciplinary, there's a disciplinary committee that sees to all these disciplinaries, and that is it. They don't have the time and the skill to necessarily deal with matters of disciplinary. So who speaks, or does, so I'm not a qualified teacher. I don't know if there's something that they get taught in their teaching, when they do studying. I can't imagine that it forms part. So yeah, just, are schools aware of this? Do teachers get training on this and all of these things?
Yeah, thank you, Lizette, for your question. And you're absolutely right. There is really not much awareness regarding peer mediation. This is a relatively new concept, or an old concept in other countries or jurisdictions, and we'll speak about New Zealand in a moment, that has been using peer mediation in their schools successfully. But currently in South Africa, teachers are not trained on peer mediation because that's not their area of expertise, right? Their area of expertise is teaching. And like you mentioned, Lizette, is to get the academic program going and complete. They are not there to address issues of discipline, although they often are within their classrooms. So this is exactly what this paper is advocating for, is that more surrounding this alternative dispute resolution process that could save a child's life. I'm going to go to that extent, because there is a stigma attached to going through a school disciplinary hearing, being suspended or expelled. And children or learners who go through these processes often end up in court one day because of the process that they've gone through, and now they are seen as criminals, they're seen as problem children, they're seen as wrongdoers. So they have the stigma attached to them, and they end up that stigma is with them for the rest of their lives. So no training is not given to teachers, but it's also school specific. And there's not much awareness regarding peer mediation. And this is what this article is seeking to create awareness that peer mediation could potentially be an option to school discipline. Teachers do not have the skills. They are generally not trained as mediators themselves. But remember, peer mediation is where the learners are trained in mediation. And I'll discuss that in a moment. So we need to create the awareness, and from there, this could spread into peer mediation being mandatory in all discipline issues. Lizette, I hope that answers your question.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Monique.
And I'll probably delve deeper into answering that question in a moment when I look at how peer mediation can work in our schools.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Lizette. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the nature of mediation. You all know what mediation is. Here's a definition for you. And in the paper, we obviously break down this definition. So moving on to peer mediation. So peer mediation occurs in a school setting where trained learners assist their fellow learners through a confidential and non-adversarial process to resolve a conflict. So where disputes arise between peers or between learners, so this is where disputes are between learners and not necessarily between teacher and learner, but between learners themselves. So where learners are in a dispute, the disputing learners would have to agree to mediation. The wrongdoer and the wronged learner will then meet with a peer mediator to assist them to resolve the dispute. So here we can see that learners need to be trained and educated in mediation, and specifically peer mediation. Within peer mediation, there is generally little to no intervention by an educator. If, however, a grave matter arises, such as sexual harassment between learners, intervention by an educator or a mediation specialist might be required to mediate that matter. So, George, coming back to your comment that you made before about rape and sexual harassment, we are of the view that these are examples of matters that are not suitable for peer mediation. So during peer mediation, learners are allowed to tell their stories like any other mediation process. They are allowed to express their emotions. They are given a voice as opposed to just the facts being heard. And we know that in a school disciplinary hearing, they are only concerned with the facts. But in mediation, it's more about the underlying story. So thereafter, the peer mediator guides the discussion. The peer mediator will guide the discussion and the learners will use their creativity in search of solutions. If a resolution is reached, the learners will sign and conclude a mediation agreement or a memorandum of understanding, and this would then be binding on them. And here, of course, we can get the parents involved too, specifically because the learners are minors. So the parents would also be involved subsequently after the mediation has taken place, or if the learners cannot agree but require the permission from their parents, then of course their agreement must be sought before the agreement can be signed. So the primary objective of peer mediation is to facilitate constructive improvements in the relationship between the wronged and the wrongdoer learner, because ultimately these learners will still maybe share a classroom together. They will, of course, share the school. They will still attend the same school. And if they, for instance, in grade 8, they just started their high school career, they still have many years to be together in the same school. So we want that relationship to be repaired, and we want there to be restoration. So peer mediation allows learners to resolve conflicts constructively amongst themselves, rather than relying on a punitive school disciplinary system or school disciplinary measures. Okay, so that is the definition of peer mediation. So just comparing peer mediation to the school disciplinary process or hearing. So first, as we know, peer mediation enables learners to identify their interests and needs. So because learners are identifying their interests and needs, learners understand each other's interests and they work towards mutually beneficial resolutions. So this is what mediation is about, right? Uncovering what is underneath the iceberg and not only what's on top of the iceberg. So peer mediation also looks at needs and interests, whereas in a disciplinary hearing, there is no consideration for the learner's interests and needs. It is all about the facts. So the transgressed learner's interests and those of the other stakeholders are not given due consideration because the main focus is on the transgressor learner, the learner that was wronged. So it is adversarial, a disciplinary hearing, it is adversarial and hostile in nature, because it resembles a court of law, and we know that in litigation, it is adversarial. There's cross-examination, there's the wronged learner is asked interrogating questions. Why? Because the facts must be uncovered. Secondly, in peer mediation, there's an open dialogue. An open dialogue includes actively participating in a conversation. So active listening must be employed. Learners must actively listen to one another. But in a disciplinary hearing, the views and opinions of the the wronged learner or transgressor learner is not considered. It is not of importance. So this generally leaves them feeling disempowered because their voice is not heard, whereas in a mediation, their voice is heard. Peer mediation is educating and empowering in nature because learners are taught diverse skills such as problem-solving skills, interpersonal skills, and how to understand another person. And as we know, these skills are pertinent. These skills we need in our everyday lives. So there's education and there's empowering in a peer mediation. Whereas in a disciplinary hearing, the objective there is to penalize the transgressed learner. So learners are not taught any of these skills. Instead, the objective is to penalize the transgressor learner, the learner who done wrong. So the learner really learns nothing constructive. Fourthly, in a peer mediation, we know that there is no authoritative influence. All the learners are on the same footing. They are all peers. So it is not like the one is in a higher or better position than the other. In a disciplinary hearing, it is authoritative. And so because we have the school, the principal, the educators, the school governing body in themselves, they hold a superior position to that of the learner. So this creates a power imbalance in the disciplinary hearing, leaving the transgressor learner feeling powerless compared to the school authorities who have power or authority. We know that peer mediation or mediation in general is confidential, although it has its limits to it, especially when parents have to be involved and parents have to sign an agreement to give permission to in order for the learner to sign. But generally, it is a confidential process. So what happens in the mediation room should stay in the mediation rooms. So learners would feel free to share their feelings and emotions as well as their stories, as not many individuals are present. It is usually the peer mediator and the two learners in the mediation room. In a disciplinary hearing, it is not so. There is no confidentiality because even the results of a disciplinary hearing can be publicized, as we saw in the fourth image at the beginning of this presentation. And the name, even a learner's name, can be out in the media and in the newspaper, on social media, to say that this learner committed this offense and this was the outcome. So there is no confidentiality in a disciplinary hearing. And then we have in constructive outcomes in a peer mediation. We know that in a mediation, parties can be creative. They come up with a solution. So a constructive solution is an apology, for instance. So the learner who had done the wrong can make an apology and can also pay compensation for damages. But we know that the solutions are determined by the learners involved. They are the decision makers and they can be creative about the outcomes. Whereas in a disciplinary hearing, it is destructive. The outcomes are destructive and it is only between a suspension and an expulsion. And we know that this is punitive and could be detrimental to the teaching and learning agenda for that learner who is suspended or expelled. Finally, peer mediation teaches responsible behavior, and this is the goal of a disciplinary system at school. So learners will learn to take responsibility for their mistakes, enabling them to make amends, whereas in a disciplinary hearing, there is little to no accountability. Okay, I must confess that I have been through a disciplinary hearing myself, as a learner when I was in high school, so I wasn't always the most disciplined at the time. So I can attest to this being the case, that there is no accountability, or if you, if I, of course, have subsequently metamorphosed and transformed and have learned to take responsibility for my actions. But I can attest to a disciplinary hearing being very detrimental to your reputation, and then also to the learning agenda, because when you are suspended from school, your academics can be affected. And then just to compare, in New Zealand, peer mediation is very prevalent. So there's an organization called the Peace Foundation in New Zealand, and they have instituted and established certain programs in schools. Program in primary schools, and the Leadership Through Peer Mediation program in high schools. So these programs are administered by the Peace Foundation, and which was established in 1975. And the vision of this foundation is to promote peaceful communities at local, national, and global levels. And as part of their programs, and these programs specifically, they want to bring peace to our communities, and they have, of course, started in schools. So since 1991, New Zealand has incorporated mediation into its school discipline system. So the Cool Schools program introduced peer mediation in New Zealand, and it has been successful and even rolled out in high schools. So some of the issues that they resolve in peer mediation is friendship fallouts, arguments, bullying, and harassment disputes. And of course, it has been successful. They have even implemented National Schools Peace Week in various leadership programs. And this program is just to cultivate respect among learners and to create a safe school environment. So the Cool Schools program commenced with 12 primary schools, and because of its success rate, it was implemented into 2/3 of primary, intermediate, and secondary schools in New Zealand. These programs largely had a 94% conflict resolution success rate. Because of the peer mediation, the success of the peer mediation programs, there was a decrease of bullying at schools, as well as improved levels of self-confidence and self-esteem among learners. And to date, in 2023, this program has been introduced in over 2,000 schools in New Zealand. As mentioned, the Cool Schools program was expanded to reach secondary schools, or high schools as we know it, and that is when the Leadership Through Peer Mediation program started. And the vision of the Leadership Through Peer Mediation is to empower students to become ambassadors of social justice, giving them a sense of responsibility, as well as an opportunity to become student leaders. So New Zealand is a clear example of the success of peer mediation within our schools. So just practically, how would we integrate peer mediation into South African public high schools? So as a point of departure, it is worthwhile mentioning that the guidelines state that schools cannot delegate discipline to learners, as they have no authority. We already know that learners have no authority within a school. However, it is important to note that peer mediation does not involve transferring authority. It merely allows learners to seek the assistance of a trained peer mediator to resolve their conflict. Therefore, if disputing learners who are the decision makers, it is the learners, disputing learners, who are the decision makers and who ultimately resolve their dispute. So peer mediation is not in contravention of the guidelines. So we recommend in this paper that peer mediation should be used as a first step integrated into the disciplinary system. So as a point of departure, if learners find themselves that they have transgressed the code of conduct, we are saying that peer mediation should be used as a first step, where the disciplinary hearing should be used as a second step. Okay, any comments on this? We only have about 5 minutes remaining, so are there any comments on this? No comments? All right. So we are of the view that it should be mandatory, and so learners must constructively engage in the peer mediation process before a matter is heard in a disciplinary process. So rather than peer mediation just being a tick box exercise, the learners must take the process seriously, and they should actively participate in the peer mediation process. If a resolution is not reached in the peer mediation, it then transgresses, or it progresses rather, to the next step, which is a disciplinary hearing. So for us, it is important for these safeguards to be in place. So that is why we are advocating for this two-step process. And so just coming back to what types of disputes can be heard in peer mediation. So we give a list of disputes. So disputes including insults, taunting, spreading of rumors or gossiping, friendship quarrels, confrontation, intimidation, bullying, cyberbullying, which is very common today, harassment, and minor fighting incidents would be suitable for peer mediation. So disputes involving violence, weapons, drugs, sexual harassment, or abuse is not suitable for peer mediation. Instead, it could take the form of victim-offender mediation or another restorative justice process, but it can then also run parallel to a more punitive process, such as a disciplinary hearing. So this two-step model means that the disciplinary procedure will continue to be part of school discipline. However, implementing mandatory peer mediation would decrease the number of cases that proceed to the formal process. And studies have shown that this method of referring cases to peer mediation first, before it goes to a disciplinary hearing, has proven to be successful. Furthermore, this would result in educators being able to focus on the teaching and learning agenda with more disciplined learners. Okay, so we also look at the practicalities. What would this practically mean? So, of course, the first thing is that the school's code of conduct should be amended, and it should include peer mediation as a point of departure for resolving disputes. Then we also discuss issues of training for learners. Learners should, of course, receive mediation training, as well as teachers. Not all teachers, but a few teachers could partake in mediation training. We also advocating for mediation being part of the general curriculum. Nowadays, I don't know what is taught in life orientation nowadays, but I definitely know that mediation or conflict resolution or conflict management skills ought to be taught at the school level already, because we face conflict daily. So it is important for learners to have skills that they can use to resolve conflict. So we're also advocating for a change in the life orientation curriculum, as this would definitely assist parties to know more about mediation. And we obviously also mentioned the Department of Basic Education, that schools, which includes the principal and teachers, should buy into the peer mediation process. And of course, funding is important. Funding needs to be made available for learners to be trained and for teachers to be trained. There must be an administrative process involved. So all in all, we are advocating that we need a disciplined school environment at our public high schools, as well as our primary schools. And peer mediation is potentially a solution. And through peer mediation, the goals of self-discipline and responsible behavior will be attained, because this ultimately is the agenda of a school discipline system, for learners to take responsibility for their actions and for learners to be self-disciplined. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my presentation. I am happy to take questions at this time. I see that we only have about a minute remaining. I see, George, you have your hand up. George?
Yeah, thank you, Monique. Very interesting. Just to understand peer mediation, is it similar to restorative justice? Because I recall, and if you remember well, that my mini thesis on mediation was the circle process. And I've done the New Zealand, discussing the whole New Zealand. And it was very interesting to see the people involved in the restorative justice, because social worker, they even had a representative from the police office also involved. Now, I think that when you do this, it's important to have the right people involved in this. But I think the big drawback comparing South Africa to New Zealand is that restorative justice is something that is there in the culture of certain groups there, so the people are used to it, where it's not so much in South Africa. So you're going to have to educate the parents as well. What is this peer mediation, so they can have a buy-in? Otherwise, you're going to sit with a problem on that. So I think that is the main goal, to educate the parents on that. What is the purpose? What is the aim? And to deal with the issues, because then it will make it so much easier. But let me pause there. I can talk a lot more, but seeing we're running out of time. Thanks.
Thank you, George. And yes, it's really all about education and awareness, like Lizette mentioned earlier. It's raising awareness, and having conversations like we are having this evening is a point of departure. And I'm not sure how many of you are within the education department, or teachers or no teachers, but it's really about spreading this notion of peer mediation. So we need schools to get on board. We need government, of course, to get on board. We need our teachers. We need our parents, George, like you were saying. We need buy-in from them. And then, of course, the learners, because it is ultimately them that have to have this mentality of, let me resolve disputes in another way. Let me talk to the person who has wronged me, instead of fighting and the conflict escalating. So it's really education, empowerment, it is awareness. And it has to start somewhere. Like I said, yes, maybe we cannot compare ourselves to New Zealand. They've been doing this for a long time, but surely they can be used as a blueprint to what we can adopt here in South Africa. There is an organization currently in Cape Town who does peer mediation training, but we need more resources. We need more schools getting on board. We need more principals getting buying into this process, because it is ultimately them that can draft the policies and change the school's code of conduct, and just change the school's culture on how we resolve disputes. So regarding restorative justice, it can be seen as a form of restorative justice, because it's ultimately about repairing relationships, because we see broken relationships in schools. We see learners coming from broken homes, and they bring that brokenness to schools, and it ultimately affects the school environment. So yeah, repairing relationships, restoring the harm, etc. I see a comment in the chat. Let me just get to the chat. Okay, chat. I'm sorry, chat. Okay, peer mediation will really assist so that teaching and learning is not interrupted. Absolutely, that is the goal. So when you have a disciplined school environment, then learners can attend to their schoolwork. The teaching and learning agenda can progress and continue because learners are now disciplined, they are listening, they are more interactive and engaged. So I absolutely agree with you there. Lizette saying earlier, the school counselor can also do training on mediation. Absolutely. If there is a school counselor or a social worker based at school, we know in public schools we don't have access to these individuals, but certainly if there is a school counselor or social worker, they can receive training and then do the training for peer mediation if they want to become trainers or facilitators. How informed or educated are educators on these matters? Was that your question earlier, Lizette? Because currently
Yes, Monique, it was.
Yeah. So thank you for your question again. So educators, teachers do not know about this idea or concept of peer mediation, but I think principals, they should be made aware. So if you know of principals or teachers, please tell them about peer mediation and that it is actually a thing or a concept that can be incorporated into the disciplinary procedure. Are there any other questions? No, I trust that you enjoyed the presentation, the talk. I trust that you were enlightened. Jonathan?
Yes, can I make a comment? I mean, I was for 23 years in education.
Okay.
Your presentation is good. However, in terms of the code of conduct, we usually have 4 categories of offenses. So for me, your peer mediation would definitely, I would say, probably link with 1 and 2, which is more or less, you know, the classroom kind of offenses, you know, like littering and things like that. But I think your biggest challenge will be in terms of 3 and 4, where it is quite serious. And I think I think George alluded to that as well. So that will be the one challenge in terms of it, you know, because there is now severe assault, for example, or, you know, coming with a very dangerous weapon and cause grievously bodily harm. I mean, recently I had one matter where a matric student, you know, tried to assault the principal. And, you know, that was plain, you know, they will go for expulsion. So for me, I agree with the principle of it, but I think we need to just fine tune it a little bit in terms of the offense. And I think that was George said. The other thing also that I would probably see in a thing like this is after the offense and after we get to some agreement that you have a kind of a follow-up. My experience is, you know, that sometimes if people lack, you know, belonging, generosity, mastering, you know, their reaction and their behavior would definitely show up. What I pick up, you know, with the school where I was previously, we introduced the choice theory of William Glasser. And that was based on after the offense, you know, you need to almost go through a series of sessions that everything that you do is a choice. And everything that you get, you know, is a perceive of information. So for me, that is the one thing that I'm still notice at schools that are still lacking. So we get to the point where we say, you know, forgiveness, and everybody think is kumbaya. And then you find a week after that, a month after that, the same kind of offenses. So for me, there's something lacking in terms of, you know, supporting and even evaluating it, you know, in 3 weeks and 4 weeks time to see, you know, where the progress is going. But in general, I agree with you. I think I agree with George. It's just, you know, we need to point down or limit it, narrow it down to what kind of offenses we're talking about. And I think that is in court right now as well. You know, there's somebody wrote an article right now of sexual offenses, you know, you can't mediate that in a court as well. So that is just the thing. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your comments. I do agree that not all types of disputes are peer mediatable, or can be mediated in peer mediation. Although I do think we need to start somewhere, and if we can start with the little offenses, the minor offenses, eventually we will see that the major offenses are not being committed, because there's been this culture of let me rather talk, let me not fight, let me not assault, let me not commit grievous bodily harm. So it's really about instilling a culture of how to resolve conflict, how to deal with conflict in our everyday lives. Because if you can deal with the little, eventually the bigger will have an impact on the bigger. So I just believe that we need to start somewhere. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Monique. An excellent presentation once again. Thank you to everyone who participated very, very well. Until next time, much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.